Good afternoon and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio online lunchtime talk. These are live every Friday at 1 p.m, beaming out onto your smartphones, laptops, iPads and living room televisions. My name is Martin O'Leary and I'm the Pervasive Media Studio's creative technologist. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. An especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio for whom this may be the first time you're engaging with us. For all of you newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding, product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England and the University of Bristol. We're a home for early ideas, companies and a meeting place of both the creative and commercial industries. And we're a studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free for our residents. But most of all, we're a safe place for artists to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. Now, this week's talk is by the former inclusion producer for the Southwest Creative Technology Network, now the head of workforce development for One Dance UK, Jazlyn Pinckney. She'll be talking about her work on data-led inclusion practices and about bridging the gap between data-driven outcomes and the soft, messy human side of her work. There'll be a Q&A at the end with the talk running at round about 40 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, pop them into that chat window. I'll pick them out to ask Jazlyn. Or if you like, you can tweet your questions to @PMStudioUK. A captioned version of this talk will be available here after the talk is finished. Before we start, next week's talk is by Watershed's very own Faraha Hassani. She'll be talking about the relationship between borders, migrants and technology, about her own experience as a precarious migrant, and about the action that's needed to move us towards a world without borders. You can get news on all of our future talks by following us on @PMStudioUK on Twitter, or @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or by subscribing to the newsletter on our website. Please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, give the video a thumbs up. The more subscribers we get, the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. And please feel free to share this link now on any of your socials. For now though, I'm going to hand over to Jazlyn.
Thanks, Martin. Hello, everyone. My name is Jazlyn Pinckney. I am the head of workforce development, as Martin said, and I used to work as the inclusion producer for a couple of projects based at the Watershed. And today I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that I've been thinking about in my practice as a producer, thinking about people and the complicated interwovenness of how you work alongside and for the benefit of people in all different types of ways. And so this talk is called The Art of Inclusion, Strategies that Allow Compassion, Innovation and Artistry to Flourish. So we're looking at a white screen here, and on the right-hand side is the hand-drawn picture of a hand with a pen in it, and it said, "This machine builds trust." This is an image made by an artist called David Lowenstein. So to start off this talk, I wanted to talk about kind of my inclusion producer practice before some of the things that we're talking about. So how I started off my practice. So I've been doing this kind of work for about 10 years, just over 10 years, about 12 years. And as an inclusion producer, I have a bunch of resources and tools and strategies that have helped me do this kind of work. And it's helped me do this work in lots of different disciplines and lots of different types of sectors, and helping support different types of art forms. And those tools are they've been really, really useful, really valuable, and they have been made in collaboration with communities, with people. They have been made, they have been found, they have been researched, they've been sort of honed over a 10-year period of doing this sort of work. And those processes look a lot like the tools that we use every day in lots of different sort of project-based work. So they're usually, documents or paper-based tools or, online formats or programs that used to help us move projects along. And they're things like, project plans or budget sheets or, demographic data surveys, all this kinds of stuff that help us move participants, people and community through a project to a successful outcome. And they've all been really useful. I can't do projects without that kind of work. And they've always been iterative. So we look at evaluating and honing them as things go along. But I have to say that quite often there has been a moment where conflict or tension has arisen in the program, and the tools or the processes have failed me in a way to approach those things. So, I sometimes think that I'm making a process for people and with people, but then there'll be moments where these moments of conflict or tension arise where I feel totally unprepared and unequipped on how to handle them and move forwards. And what has usually taken place is one of four responses has happened when these moments of tension happen. So number one, I think I didn't follow the process closely enough. There's something in here that I missed. I didn't explain something properly. I didn't give people enough warning or this, that, and the other. And I didn't follow the process fully. And now we have a moment of conflict or tension. The second thing that sometimes I think of is this process is broken. We didn't consider X, Y, Z when we were making this process. And now it's not fit for purpose. It's not helping us consider the point of views of this person or that person or this group or that idea. And the process needs to change. This is obviously a really healthy thing to think. We should definitely make sure we allow processes to grow and change. But that's kind of like a default thing of the process is broken. That's why there's been this moment of conflict. Number four, and this is a bit of an admission of guilt, I have thought this, I do think this, and I have to work really hard to challenge my thinking around this. But in moments of conflict or tension, if they are directed near or about me, one of my responses has been, people are unreasonable. That person has brought something to this space that isn't necessarily to do with what we're talking about. They've brought emotions in that aren't relevant to the work, or they're not listening or hearing me, or they're not seeing my value. And somehow I feel that people's emotions are getting in the way of the work that we have to do. That's like not great to say, but that's, I'm exercising some honesty in how I think about the responses to these things. And the fourth thing, again, is kind of, a bit vulnerable for me to admit, but I can instantly go into a bit of a shame vortex where I go, I'm a terrible person. I haven't got the skills. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not deft enough. I'm not, knowledgeable enough to handle these situations. Somebody else would have done this better than me. Somebody else has better skills, more experience, can work more quickly on their feet. And if they were doing it, we would have had a better experience. So those are like my four go-to responses when there are these moments of conflict or tension, or there's a disagreement, or people are bringing those emotional elements into the work. And I genuinely believed up until probably about 2 years ago, that there would be a way or a world in which I had built the most perfect toolkit and had the most, experienced and detailed driven process that I could actually produce a project where everything would go brilliantly, and that there would be no emotion, or if there were any emotions, they would only be good and positive. People would have really good responses for it. I genuinely believe that that was possible, that there was an element of perfection that I could achieve if I just knew enough or did enough or had research enough or blah, 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 blah. And what do I mean by these moments of conflict or these moments of tension? Well, maybe you've experienced some of these in the work that you've done, or maybe you've been, you felt that when you've brought yourself into a project or work. I think everything has felt really heightened over the last couple of years with COVID, with remote working, with the talks around racial equity and injustice, and how at the forefront of our minds and our structures they are at the moment. So what do I mean by those moments of conflict? I mean, how do you deal with all the bigness of our lives in the immediacy of a project? How can that project benefit from bringing all of that into the space, but also move forwards when we do have those sort of conflicts? So 2020, as the pandemic hits, obviously work slows down a touch. I'm also having my first and only child, so I'm on maternity. And so this is the first time in my professional career, probably for a long time, that I'm not in the middle of a project, and I really don't have to be thinking about anything on the back burner. I just have free time, an undisclosed amount of free time at the moment. And so I'm listening to a podcast, and I'm just, just enjoying stuff and taking stuff in, which hasn't happened for quite a long time. And so the podcast I'm listening to is this one. It's called Finding Threads. It's by a really amazing journalist called Carvel Wallace, who does a lot of work with This American Life. He's really fantastic. This podcast is a series talking about Fred Rogers, who you might not have heard of him here in the UK, but in the US, he is a children's television presenter, host. He's made this whole show that ran from the late 60s all the way to the early 2000s. And Fred Rogers is a Presbyterian minister, which you won't be surprised to know when you sort of see him in action. But he created this TV show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, in which he for the first time really in children's television, allows children to bring their emotional well-being into the center of any sort of narrative. So he encourages children to understand that the emotions that they feel are the drama of the work, of the show. So there's not chases or gunshots or dragons or explosions. It's actually a very slow and gentle show. And the drama is children kind of dealing with these new emotional issues, like having a haircut for the first time, or welcoming a new brother or sister into the world, or the frustration of not being able to tie their shoe. And so in this podcast series that Carver Wallace interviews lots of people and talks about Fred Rogers, there's this episode in which Fred Rogers explains a story that he heard from a child, which he then made into a song. And it starts with this sentence: "What do we do with the mad that we feel?" And Fred Rogers makes this into a beautiful, charming song, and it's really interesting and insightful. But for me, it was a real kind of spark moment, because I thought, oh, wait, what do we do with the mad that we feel? An actual feeling. What do we do with that? What do we do with an emotion to move us through that state into another? And so in the song, Fred Rogers talks about actions that you can do as a child to help move you, transition you through a feeling of madness into something else. That felt really important to me. So Fred Rogers kind of describes the work that he does as this. He uses this expression, or this quote. He has an expression of care, which I think is a lovely sentiment, an expression of care that children understand that feelings are mentionable and manageable. And that like really took me by surprise, because having a space or a process that you can have your emotions be mentionable and manageable, like they're not insurmountable things, they're actually things that will benefit our program and our process, and we can work through them collectively. That was like a real change in the way that I was thinking about stuff. So it got me thinking. I've been designing a process of work that is void of emotion, or it only seeks for positive emotion. What would it look like to imagine a space where emotions are allowed, maybe even encouraged, maybe even welcomed? And then as soon as I thought that, I thought, why does that feel so scary? And why does that feel so hard? And what has told me that work is no place for emotion? So that is the provocation of which this talk is about. It's like, how do we think about the softness of our humanness and allow infrastructures and systems that will support that? So is there another way? Armed with this question, with this thought, I thought, okay, what else is out there? Who is doing this work? What other kinds of tools or books or theories can I look at that will help guide my thinking in this way? And so the first thing I found was this book here. Actually, it's called Nonviolent Communications, and this is the author. His name is Marshall Rosenburg. Oh, I have to give a props. All the books that I'm referencing have been given to me or passed on to me or shown to me by people. And it's really important to give the credit to the people who have inspired me. So this is my sister's book. So thank you, Amber Pinckney, for lending me that book. And so this is a picture of a man in a red shirt, and he's leaning back and he's looking a little bit curious, I guess. And he's got two finger puppets on his hands. One's of a giraffe and one is of a, I'm going to say, wolf, dog, something like that. And it's got a sticker that says, "You talking to me?" So Marshall Rosenburg is an American psychologist. He's an author and a mediator. And in the early 60s, he started a process for communication, which he coined nonviolent communication. And it was all in aid of supporting partners to resolve conflict, but not just within relationship, but also within society. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what nonviolent communication looks like, and I'm also going to give you an example of what it sounds and feels like. So nonviolent communication has 4 principles. It's observation, it's feeling, need, and then request. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to break it down and give you a bit of an example. So an observation is about saying, what is your true knowable facts? What is the situation in just the terms of facts? And this is really hard to do. This is something that does not come easy to me. I am not really used to saying things in just fact terms. Facts are always embellished with emotion or assumption or intention. And so for me to just work on stripping out just what the fact is in front of me has been a really challenging thing to do. So I'm going to run an example. So an example of an observation is, I am talking online today about my work. That's just the fact. There's nothing else, there's nothing added to that. So section 2 is feelings. So how do I feel? How has what I've said, how has the observation made me feel? So for example, I could say, I'm doing a talk online today about my work and I feel nervous or vulnerable or cautious. And there's a little catch around the feeling because we can only talk about the feelings that we feel. We can't make assumptions about how other people might feel or how we think they feel. So for an example, it wouldn't be useful, it wouldn't be in the nonviolent communication structure for me to say, I feel that I'm letting people down, or I feel like people aren't understanding what I'm saying, because I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, and I don't know if I'm letting you down. I can only connect to what I feel. So like even thinking about feelings in terms of centering your own experiences and what actually you feel inside your body is a really different way of thinking about stuff. The third is the need. What do I need after the feeling and the observation? So I'm talking about my work online today. I feel nervous and vulnerable. The reason I'm doing this because I want to share the passion that I have for the tools that have influenced my work. That's why I'm doing it. That's the need for me to communicate, is because I want to share with you all the things that have influenced my work. And then the last thing is the request. Now, the thing about a request is that it should be a concrete action that is achievable, and it's a request and not a demand. So we have to be willing for the answer not to be what we want it to be, or for it to be no. And so my request after this, in this example, is, can I request that feedback is gentle and action-based? So to hear all of that together, it sounds like this. I'm talking online today about my work, and I feel nervous and vulnerable and a bit cautious. Because I need to share my passions for the tools that have so positively impacted my life, can I request that feedback is gentle and action-based? So even just like hearing how different that might sound from how I might ask for something in my traditional ways is like a huge thing. And why am I telling you about this type of communication? What has this got to do with the talk? Well, when we think about moments of conflict, the frontier, the shop window of that is communication. If someone comes to me and they're upset with something, or there's a moment of tension, or they've not understood what I'm doing, the way we have that conversation is via communication, whether that's email or face-to-face or nonverbal or whatever. And so I can't really interrogate how to allow space for full emotions without interrogating how I use communication to support or make that more difficult. And so this quote from Rosenburg is really helpful. It says, we can make life miserable or wonderful for ourselves and others, depending on how we think and communicate. So that's been like a real helpful motivation to think about changing the way that we communicate. And so my takeaway from nonviolent communication has been that connecting empathetically with others and with myself makes more satisfying relationships. And that this framework gives me time out to consider myself and others and engage empathetically. And I mean, like physically gives me time out, because none of that stuff comes easily to me. I have to actually like get the book and go like, okay, what am I trying to say? And like craft it together. And so it takes actual time, in which that time is cooling off time, it's reflection time, it's trying to work out what my feeling is, what my need is, what my request is. So like this, the gift of time actually also lends itself to this kind of communication. And the last thing I want to say is that it's about developing empathy. And I say the word empathy all the time. Empathy is intrinsic to inclusion work, and it's absolutely part of the world that I operate in. But what I've noticed is that developing empathy is really hard. It's so easy to say about being empathetic. It's actually really, really difficult to do that, because our society doesn't encourage empathy, doesn't encourage us to imagine empathy in abundance. So what I've noticed about doing this kind of work is that I have empathy and I'm very quick to give empathy, but the root of my empathy is transactional. And I've noticed, which is quite shocking for me, and quite shocking revelation for me, is that although I'm quick to give empathy, if I feel that it's not reciprocated or acknowledged or matched, the empathy feels thin. It starts running a little thin for me. So that's been something that's been a real revelation to my thinking, especially as I work around inclusion, and you hear people say empathy and bringing their whole selves to work. Well, what does that look and feel like for you? And so this has been kind of my work around thinking about empathy and communication. So the next thing is, we've talked about kind of ways of communicating. The next thing is, okay, well, what processes, what structures will help us do this work? So here we've got a slide of Adrienne Maree Brown. She's got her arms to her side like she's a strong person with tattoos on her arms. And the pink sticker says, work like nature. Adrienne Maree Brown has written this book, which is called Emergent Strategies. And I have to give 2 shout outs for this book. So Natalie Najamina and Melissa Brown. Natalie informed me about this book. She helped me work through this book. When I first started at Watershed, she told me about it and we worked on it together. I owe her a huge debt of gratitude. And this is actually Melissa Brown, who also works at the Watershed. This is her book. So I'm sorry that I've stuck those post-its in it. So what is Emergent Strategies? Well, it's actually a little bit complicated to describe. So we're looking at a black screen here. On the left-hand side is a comic book style of squares with pictures of nature in it. And underneath each square, it will explain the book. And I'm going to use this description to help us talk about it. This is an image by an artist called Kevin Thomas. He also has written this synopsis of the book. So shout out to Kevin Thomas for that. So Emergent Strategy this book is a hybrid manifesto spellbook toolkit, applies the most utopian ideas of Octavia Butler to organize, urging that movements must use biomimicry to be resilient, adaptive, decentralized, interconnected, detoxifying, fractal, and iterative in nature to create a future worthy of Earthseed. That's hard to say, and so truthfully, I only knew about 50% of those words before reading this book. But this book is an absolute love letter to new modes of ways of working. And so don't let those words at all be a barrier to accessing this book, because it's written with such heart and care and openness that actually it takes you along with you and you feel like you get all of those words at the end of it. But in essence, the idea of the book is let's look to nature to see where structures have supported the well-being not only of the organism itself, but of the environment, both in terms of a social environment or a community context, but also in terms of a global and environmental sense of environment. So thinking about things like mushrooms or cells or waves or ferns or murmurations of birds, how do they share the work and the load? How do they all get a moment to rise and all take a moment to rest for the greater good of existence and thriving and all that kind of stuff? So this book has been really helpful in thinking about biomimicry and how we can look to nature for those things, but it does so much more than that, because Adrienne Maree Brown does not shy away from why we don't already do that, why our systems are already built on oppression and supremacy and capitalism. And she talks about how we can own those narratives and those roots and understand why we are built in these capitalist models, because we need to understand that before we can really break through of them. So I just want to read a really small bit about this book, because it helps kind of crystallize what this does. So Adrienne Maree Brown is talking about how we're using biomimicry to think about new structures. And she says, and now it's like ways for humans to practice being in right relationship to our home and to each other, to practice complexity and to grow a compelling future together through relatively simple interactions. Emergent strategy is how we intentionally change the ways that grow our capacity to embody the just and liberated worlds we long for. So it's a really great book to think about new ways of doing stuff. And it's both theoretical and practical. It has actual practical resources in it. So that's a really useful tool to help think about that. And so what I've got from reading that book is taking time to dedicate to the craft of producing or leading or facilitating, and then also interrogating what are the prevailing systems, why are they in place, and who do they benefit, and how can we commit to another way? And thinking about biomimicry as imitations of models and systems and elements within nature that for the purpose of solving complex human problems, use something that's elegant and really simple. So we've thought about how we talk, we've thought about how we might use structures. So the next thing is we have to think about us. We have to fold us into the project. So this is a picture of Brene Brown. She's a woman, a white woman with blonde hair. And there's a little pink sticker that says, check yourself. And I'm always a bit nervous about talking about Brene Brown because she doesn't resonate with everyone. And I totally get that. But I roll with Brene Brown because she does a couple of things that really connect to my work. She talks about vulnerability, about ego, and about shame. You've seen the TED Talk, you know about those things, but this is the book that I'm referencing today. It's Dare to Lead. Brené Brown is talking about new models of leadership and how you hold yourself accountable first. So this is why it's important to me. Brené Brown, for me, helps me work on my ego. Ego is a huge part of, it's the fallout of kind of this capitalist idea of this meritocracy. Is you're only as good as your worth. You have to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. You're only as good as your last job. You go, go, go. All of that feeds into the idea of ego. And for me, I have historically felt that, you know, as a woman of color, as an immigrant to the UK, as multiple kind of labels that have, you know, served me and held me back in different ways, I felt that my voice hasn't always been fully heard or fully realized. And so ego has been really integral to like giving me focus and keeping my intentions, you know, in line. And it served me in some way. But now I feel like I'm getting into a place where more people are listening and hearing my voice. I have to check and scrutinize whether ego is still serving me. Is it still protecting me, or is it actually getting in the way of stuff? So this idea that we are feeling machines that think really helps kind of shift the way that we think about processes and people as two separate things. We think about a process, we do the process, and the people will have a good result, as opposed to allowing ourselves to just expect that we will be messy and complicated and people-driven stuff that eventually will find a way of a system that will help us move through things. So that's been a useful phrase. I'm going to just quote something from Brené Brown's book that has really helped me own, accept, and acknowledge the ego work that I have to do and that I am doing. So it says this: the ego loves gold stars and craves acceptance and approval. It has no interest in wholeheartedness, just self-protection and admiration. Our ego will do almost anything to avoid or minimize the discomfort associated with feeling vulnerable or even being curious. It's just too risky. And if you want to see the ego go to DEFCON 1, get anywhere close to shame. What your ego doesn't understand is that stunting your emotional growth and shutting down our vulnerability doesn't protect us from shame or disconnection or isolation. It guarantees us. This has been so integral to the way that I think about connection and conflict resolution and how we interact with people. Because just like I was saying about empathy and how transactional the root of my empathy has been, that's because of ego. That's because I think I deserve something. And, you know, when she talks about craves acceptance and gold stars and approval, that's me. I'm absolutely that. That's like, you know, every time I've been in school, or every, you know, if you're feeling like your environment has promoted that in you, it's because it has. That's how the society promotes that. And it's all about this idea of the charming, charismatic leader that leads from the front and everyone falls in line. And that idea is a really challenging one to think about if we're actually going to think about new models of different types of models. And so kind of to summarize this point is that we can't just do the things that we've always done and expect different outcomes. So if we're thinking about new models, if we're thinking about inclusion, if we're thinking about people-centered work, if we're thinking about making space for wholeheartedness and emotion, well, we can't just use the same systems of hierarchy or capitalism or supremacy. We can't use those things to help us build new models. So my takeaway from ego work has been, it has served me, but it no longer serves me. And so I want to dismantle it. And the path to dissolving ego for me is embracing vulnerability, moving towards hope and connection with others, but not just for the sake of it or because that's a lovely phrase to say, but to be in communion with people and to actually build something together where there's equity in the work. And so that's kind of been my motivation for doing that kind of work. So we've talked a lot about what to avoid, what we don't want to be doing, what is good, what is out there, who is doing this work in different ways. And so right now on the screen, you see three very serene looking women, and they're sat in a grassy field with flowers. They've got their eyes closed, and it says with the pink sticker, "The New Good." And this is Teresa Hersey, who is affectionately known as the Nap Bishop, and she runs a project called the Nap Ministry. See it? So the Nap Ministry is rest is a radical act of resistance and meticulous love practice. And so Teresa Hersey talks about rest as being the only way to deprogram and dismantle the systems of oppression that we've all kind of learned to live within. And I find this particularly thoughtful because it was with a period of rest, with the pandemic and with being on maternity and not having work, that I was even able to enter into this kind of research or these lines of inquiries. And so just that bit of rest has informed my work so deeply and been so beneficial to the way that I think about stuff that I really see her point. So the quote on the screen says, "Let slow research be part of deprogramming your healing. You will not get free simply by reading memes on social media or attempting a quick engagement via the fast-paced world life. You have to stop. You have to dismantle your own unique cultural history in order to heal your collective and individual traumas. You will have to do the real work to change." And I just want to say something really quickly, which is I've been putting these slides together all week, and my family, I've got a little boy and my husband, they've been real sick. And so we all had a really lousy night's sleep. And on Thursday, I was trying to put this exact slide together on a poor night's sleep. And I was like, I feel lousy. I'm not doing a good job, but I'll rest once I've done this. And even writing this slide about rest, I still feel I had to earn rest. I had to do the work and earn the rest. That's how deeply embedded in us, that idea of meritocracy, of capitalism, that we need to earn to deserve. Rest is not a reward. Rest is a fundamental in our society, in our life, in the way that we operate. And we can't get anywhere near innovation without being rested, without imagination, without the sense of abundance and joy. And so that just felt like, yeah, Jazz, you have to put this slide in because you can't still do it. This is like really hard for you to do. And so when you get to the edges of what you're able to do, you know you're kind of treading in that new radical world where you need to keep working on it. So we can't talk about radical new works without mentioning Audre Lorde. So this book is a collection of essays, and there's two that really kind of underline everything that I'm talking about. The first quote is, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." That's what I'm saying. The whole point of this is we can't use tools that we've always been using and try and invent a new future that's more equitable for people. It just won't work. We'll get halfway there. We might get some successes, but we'll never get that full equity if we still think about it in those oppressive terms. And then something else that is very linked to the rest is this idea of pleasure, of joy, of imagination, like all the fun stuff that we think about, and how tied it is to reward. And so this is from Audre Lorde's essay around the use of the erotic, and it's called "Once we allow ourselves the full access to pleasure and the erotic, we will never again allow our souls to be locked into subjugation and submission." And I put that in there because I find that really useful, because all of this work is hard and difficult, but this quote makes me think that actually if we work with dedication, we'll come to a plateau where we will not be able to go back, because we will be so embodied with these ideas that they will become our norms, and we won't be able to just go back into, thinking about things in the smaller way. We'll be able to live ourselves in that full and big way. So this is the last slide. I'm kind of wrapping up by saying the kind of takeaways from these talks have been these 4 points, which are: our worth is not measured in productivity. It's capitalism and supremacy that makes us feel like that. And if we think about ourselves in terms of processes and productivity, we're never going to allow a system which allows us to bring our full emotion, joy, passion, and our fullness into the space. And trying to fit all of that into all of this will always make those moments of conflict, those moments of tension that we aren't really fully prepared for. Pleasure is our right. Pleasure is a connection with nature, with a lover, with people. It says, I'm part of something, I belong, I'm safe. We should all be working towards dismantling the unnatural mythology that rest and pleasure must be earned. And then this idea about ego, vulnerability, and boundaries. So vulnerability without boundaries isn't really vulnerability. It's confessional, it can be manipulative, it can be desperation or shock and awe. And it's not really vulnerability. So make sure you're considering your ego in that work and doing things that serve the greater good, not just yourself. And then finally, we need new ways. We won't wait to be perfect because we believe the time is now. We'd rather be held accountable for our mistakes than forgiven for our inactions. So it's a bit sprawling because such is life, isn't it? But these are all the things that I'm thinking about right now. And I'm really critically interrogating what has served me well in the past. Does it still serve me towards moving towards radically equitable work? how do I hold people at the center, people as they come, not people as I wish to imagine them? And then how do I make sure I'm doing the work on myself so that I can approach all of this with love and joy and passion and pleasure and not be bound by ego or a sense of duty or all the sorts of other things that I have been known to feel at times. So it's a work in progress, and I'm really happy to share them with you and open to any questions if you've got any. Thank you.
Thanks, Jazz. That was fantastic stuff. Really uplifting, I think. We've got questions coming in on the chat, so I'm just going to jump right in there. And Melissa Blackburn, first off the blocks, says, yeah, Brené Brown is a bit Marmite for me too, but I love when she says that clear is kind.
Yes.
So could you talk a bit about how being clear with people is a key part of this kind of journey?
So true. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And that's something I really struggle with, the clearest kind. And that's why the nonviolent communication has been such a helpful tool, because it's easy to say those sorts of phrases, clear as kind, but what that means is that you have to know what you're asking somebody. You have to know why you're asking somebody, and you have to be okay with that, with whatever the outcome will be. That's a really unstable place to make a request from. And so using a process like nonviolent communications to help give you a framework for how you're going to express yourself fully and be open to whatever the reply is has been really, really useful. And like I said, it's for me also, it's that ego work of clear as kind. The reason I'm not clear sometimes is because I want to be liked. I want to be an ally. I want to be friendly. I want to be whatever the reason is. It's usually to serve something else and not the good of the situation or the good of the development of new models. So yeah, I do like that. And this is Brené Brown, this Marmite thing, is because she's got loads of phrases that sound really good. I've used a bunch of them here, and clear as kind is one of those too. So what does that look like? Like, how do we actually do that? What does it feel like to do that work?
Great. Yeah. I wanted to ask a question myself, actually. These ideas are wonderful, but for a lot of us, and I should say, Watershed is not one of these places, but a lot of people are working in sort of more traditional environments, shall we say, places where not everyone is fully on board with all of these ideas. I was wondering if you had any advice on how you can start introducing these ideas when you're working with people who maybe are not 100% on board.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, that is actually the place I'm in right now. It's like, how do you adapt this stuff for the everyday, especially for the workspace? I mean, I think that the thing I use every single day is that nonviolent communication. That's something that you can lead by example by doing that practice, like by actually communicating in that way. But the other thing that I think is easy for everyone to adapt is the rest and pleasure thing. It's like, whilst I was at the Watershed, I did talk about the NAP ministry, and lots of people were really interested, but I did also have people who were like, well, the work just has to get done. And they're like, well, if we say that, who's going to, if we're leading and we're still thinking like that, who's going to take the first step to go, no, people are first. The work is secondary, and the work will benefit from rested people. And I know that sounds like so flippant, like, yeah, you've got to rest, but it's deeper than that. You can't be innovative. You can't be connected fully without taking time away, not being connected into the project, sleeping, being in nature, like doing things that are completely opposite to the work that you're doing. And you'll find that with people who have to create for a living, like if you're an artist, or you have to create some other kind of content, you have to go and get more inspiration from them. You have to go and live some life somewhere. So I find that the nonviolent communication as a practical tool really, really useful, that you can lead by example in that way. But for the sort of embodiment yourself work, the rest is really, really important. And take rest to mean whatever you want. Like, it doesn't have to mean have a nap. It could just mean whatever rest is, not have your screen on for a few hours. But take it seriously, invest in the rest.
I guess there's, leading on from that, there's a sort of balance between, expressing these ideas in ways that people will understand, and talking in that language of capitalism, that idea of productivity. And, if I convince people to do this because it will make people more productive, am I just, getting back into that same cycle?
I totally agree. That's why, like, I kind of avoided saying that in the first question you said, because there isn't a thing that you can say to people that would invite them to do this work more wholeheartedly. You have to just do it. You have to just do it, and it will radiate off you. The only reason that we all work the way that we work is because it's been enforced on us that that's the way that we should do it. So I could tell you, when you even hear things like, the creative case for diversity, I could tell you why it's better in a business sense to have different people in the room, or to rest and be innovative and brainstorm. But all that stuff already. Like, it's not, you can find that research out there. If when you see and feel a space where that is valued and done in practice in a deep, deep way, then you feel that there doesn't have to be an academic reason for it. You understand on a physiological level why that is necessary to our sustainment and our innovation for newness. Like, you'll feel it.
Great. I'm going to jump ahead here, actually, because there's a question here from Vic Tillotson that fits in very well here. Can you talk about how you've embedded some of these ideas practically? For example, how you work rest or not being measured by productivity into those capitalist organizational structures?
Oh my God, it's so hard. Yeah. I just, like the example I said in the presentation, I took a nap yesterday, and I feel even embarrassed to say that out loud in case, like, my new job is I took a nap in the day. I took an hour's nap because I needed to take an hour's nap and because it was essential for my well-being. And when you say it like that, no one will be like, oh, they'll be like, yeah, take what you need. But when you actually take what you need, it can feel very edgy. And I also have to be honest and say that that nap was not super restful because I was worried about what I should be doing. So, like, all of these processes are not things that I've nailed. They're only things that I'm inquiring about. And so rest is really difficult. For me also, pleasure and joy is really difficult. I find that really difficult to be open about the things that bring me pleasure and joy in my life, professionally, personally, in all sorts of spheres. And that's, again, that's lots of things, lots of kind of bigger forces at play that have told me that, you have to earn it, that my body isn't mine, that all of these other things. And that might not feel like directly linked into doing this kind of work in terms of like an inclusion producer, but it absolutely is, because if we don't allow ourselves to express the fullness of ourselves, we're always going to be selling our processes short, because it has to come with all of the light and shade. We have to make space for emotion. We have to, aim towards full pleasure and enjoyment. We have to make space for rest. Like, how do we plan a project where we're not working towards the 11th hour, where it's not on the needle? We program in plenty of space, and funding allows for that, and systems allow for that, and outcomes allow for that, so that we're not kind of running at full speed all the time. I don't have the answer, but I think if we all kind of really felt like we had to do that, it was of importance, then we could all work it out together, I'm sure.
Great. There's a question here from Zoe Rasvash, which I think is a really interesting one, which is, how do we be confident with experimental approaches and ways of working in this space? How do we bring other people along with us into the unknown when we don't actually know if it's going to work or not?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, you're so right. I really, yeah, that's a really good question. There's two things. There's kind of, how do we know what to invest in when there's risk and we're not sure for the outcome? Because there's loads of different, even in the book, Emergent Strategies, she talks about lots of different strategies that all kind of fit under this one umbrella. So there's that. And then there's also, how do you bring people along? Because I guess the kind of core of all of this work is that it's community. And so how do you do that, those things? In terms of the risk, I think we have to be okay to try and fail. And that sounds so flippant, especially when like there's nothing on the line for me right now. I'm just giving a talk. So what does that mean in a real sense? Well, I think it's about like changing what success looks like, changing what our ideas of something being successful. And I have had that in a project recently that I've worked on, where we've gotten down the line and actually things have changed massively and we've not been able to do the project, and it's been Arts Council funded as well. So we've had outcomes that we have to hit. We haven't been able to do that. And every fiber of my being was saying, we failed, we didn't do it right. It's, chalk that up to a lesson learned, that's no good. And actually we should think about things in an iterative sense. Like, there's lots of things we did wrong. There's a few things we did right. But we tried and we failed. We tried, didn't work out in that traditional model of success, but actually that still is a successful experience to try and not quite get where you want to get to. If you notice that bit, don't notice how much you failed, but notice that you tried and you had bigger intentions than you were able to achieve. So that feels like a useful kind of thing to mention there. And then to bring people along, this is really important that processes, and that's why you build in things like rest and pleasure and boundaries and new modes of communication, so that it's not like a strict regime, but it is about a commitment to engage openly with people, so that I can say, if I'm meeting my neighbor or I'm meeting the CEO of someone, that if I use the same method of communication where I'm honest about what I need, where I'm open to their requests, if I'm doing that with whoever I'm talking to, the chances of me being able to make those connections with everyone and to be able to express my need and my observation clearly with everyone, the chances are just higher. So, if you invest in these sort of principles on the micro level, they should, radiate out to the macro, so that you can talk and bring everyone along with you, because it's not about the process, it's about like how we embody that and take it out into the world.
Yeah, I guess there's a sort of divide between, the genuine, the possibility of failure, the possibility of a bad outcome, that aspect of the risk, which I think capitalist systems are very good at dealing with, versus the emotional feeling of taking a risk, which is the other side of it, which I think capitalist systems are very bad at dealing with.
Yeah, isn't that odd? Like, isn't it? We can like chalk it up to profits and loss, but if you've done something wrong, then that's, you're not profitable. You've let the site, like, it's funny how what can take the hit in the capitalist society, which also makes us think, who's it serving? It's not serving us who are doing the work. It's serving, another line. So like, that's helpful to kind of hold in our minds that the way that we're working now isn't built to serve us. Even us in this privileged position of being able to talk and lead on a project, let alone people who are, have been historically oppressed or marginalized, or that we're supposed to be working with and for and with alongside, let alone focus, in those realms.
I guess that leads on, actually, something you said, like at the very start. You were talking about, sometimes these processes turn out not to work, and sometimes things go wrong, sometimes things fail. And I guess, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you handle that in a sort of, reasonable, kind way?
Yeah, not well, honestly. But
not you specifically, but how should one?
The us, collective us. I mean, the thing that has been, I probably say the core of all of this work is trying to connect to what is feeling and what is like ego or hangover or residual other stuff. And that works, like, it has to work on an individual level, but also works at an organizational level. Like, even things, so when you haven't done as, haven't worked as fully as you wanted to, or you felt like there's been some sort of failure, you have a project hasn't quite hit where it needs to go, then you've got to connect to an actual feeling. Why does that matter to you? What was the intention that we didn't serve? And then if you can realign it back into an actual feeling that you and your community are facing, then you can work in a much smaller way to kind of address that in some way. I know for me, when I feel like I failed, my instinct is to go like I said in those first four things, I'm not good enough, or they did something wrong, it's actually on them, I get defensive. So usually it's one of those two things. It's either like some self-pity or some self-defense, like it's one of those two. And so what that does is that puts a blanket down for us to stop investigating. We don't take it any further. We just allow ourselves to sit in that first emotional, like the porchway of emotion. We just go, oh, that's it. And then doesn't put us, we're not accountable there. We're not kind of going any deeper. So you have to go a little bit deeper. Okay, I feel like self-defense because I really tried something and I risked something and I put myself out there and it didn't go that way. And now I feel like vulnerable and that I've made a mistake and that I've let people down. Like, drill down further. And then also try and find that vulnerability and boundaries thing where you can state what has happened, you can be vulnerable, but you're not making it somebody else's problem. It's that boundary thing. It's not like, oh, Martin, like it was awful and like I'm really sick today and like it didn't work out. You've got to also, the second part of the work is, once you've drilled down to the emotion, is then find the wall of where you're sharing that vulnerability and it's useful, as opposed to you're getting a free therapy session. It's just as simple as that, right? Really complicated stuff. I'm rubbish at all of this stuff, by the way. I'm just interested in it.
Oh, I don't think that's true. Important question from Tom Marshman. Did you take a nap in that bed right behind you?
I did, yeah, in this bed right here. And you know what? I'm such a phony because I took a book with me. I was like, I'm not resting, I'm not napping, I'm going to read. And then I didn't even open the book. I was like out like a light. So I'm such a liar.
Oh, that's yeah. Do you have any good strategies for those of us who have trouble with allowing ourselves to take that rest or to indulge ourselves? Any good ways of tricking yourself into doing it?
You've got to force yourself. It's so synthetic when I try and do those things. You've got to say, this is work. That's such an important thing. You've got to relabel those down moments as active. It's actual work. It's as important as checking your emails. It's as important as whatever else we all do in the daytime. It is more important. And so I do try and do that. Actively label. Sometimes, I haven't done this for a while, but sometimes I'll put it in my calendar and I won't give it a thing. It's not like I will have a nap, but it's an hour and a half where I'm not going to be online. I'm not going to be doing anything. And I need to do something else. So I have to force myself for sure. And then when I'm talking about, I had it actually working on the Watershed when I was thinking about inclusion structures. It was taking a really long time. We were working on policy and it was, it was oh, we'll get it done by the end of the week. And the week turned into 2 or to 3. And then folks were like, where's this work you're supposed to be working on, Jazz? And we had to collectively, me, Tony, Layla and Luke and a few other folks who were working on this, we had to say, this is work. We're thinking, we're researching, we're mulling, we're considering. This is all action-based work. We're all doing it. And actually, it's not going to be with you until many months down the line. Just recalibrate your expectations. It's not coming soon. And that felt so liberating. And we all were we had each other's back. So we felt a little safer to say it. But, things like that, orchestrate it for yourself, make it happen for yourself in some way. Because if we rely on just doing it because we know it's a good thing to do, we won't do it.
Well, I think that's probably a good place for us to leave it. So thank you very much, Jazlyn. It has been a joy.
Thank you, everyone. It's been really lovely. And thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Now, before you go, please remember next week's talk is by Watershed's very own Faraha Hassani. She'll be talking about the relationship between borders, migrants and technology, about her own experience as a precarious migrant, and about the action that's needed to move us towards a world without borders. You can get news on all of our future talks. Follow us on @PM Studio UK on Twitter, @Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or subscribe to the newsletter on our website. Please don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel, press that button, give the video the thumbs up. The more subscribers we get and the more likes we get, the more we can share stories like this. And do please feel free to share this link. A captioned version of the video will be available to watch again shortly after we finish up. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next week.